What kind of season should Bucs fans expect from Baker Mayfield? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you 5 days a week along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. High expectations for the Buccaneers this season, and Todd Bowles lays down the challenge. We're going to get more into that a little bit later, but I thought with the Bucs not having practice on Monday, it would be a good time to dive into Baker Mayfield a little bit and talk about some expectations for him this season. Now, we all know what he has done in Tampa. Back-to-back years with career highs in passing yards and touchdowns. Last year, he had a career high in completion percentage to add to the list. Basically, Baker has never been better than he has been since joining the Bucs. In 2024, even without Evans for a month and Godwin for 10 games, he managed to throw for 4,500 yards and 41 touchdowns while completing more than 70% of his passes. But what are the realistic expectations for him this season? It's easy to say that he'll match or exceed those numbers, considering the Bucs added Emeka Egbuka and we're going to have a full season of Bucky Irving as the RB1. This Bucs offense should be even better and even more dangerous than it was last season, and that was one of the best offenses the Bucs ever had, right? But to put it into historical perspective, you have to take a look at who else has accomplished the feat of 4,500 yards and 40 touchdowns in a season. Now, outside of Baker, only 9 other quarterbacks have ever done this. Some have done it multiple times, but that is an elite group of quarterbacks to reach that plateau. The first was Dan Marino, who did it in 1984 and 1986. Then you have Peyton Manning in 2004 and 2013, Tom Brady in 2007, 2020, and 2021. So 2 of the 3 times that Brady achieved it was in Tampa. Matthew Stafford in 2011 and 2021, Drew Brees in 2011 and 2012, Aaron Rodgers in 2011, because apparently 2011 was the year where every quarterback could do it. You had Andrew Luck in 2014, Patrick Mahomes in 2018 and 2022, and then Joe Burrow in 2024, along with Baker Mayfield. So not only have only 10 quarterbacks ever accomplished this, but only 2 of those have ever done it back-to-back years, Drew Brees and Tom Brady. So what has been the follow-up performance for these quarterbacks after hitting this milestone? Now, bear with me. Shout out to David Harrison. I'm about to do a number dump on you, and I'm going to try to go quick to get through all of these. So for Marino, to follow his 5,000-yard, 48-touchdown explosion in 1984, he had 4,100 yards and 30 touchdowns in 1985. So over 900 yards and 18 touchdowns less than the year before. In 1986, he had over 4,700 yards and 44 touchdowns. Then in 1987, he had just over 3,200 yards and 26 touchdowns, but missed 4 games. He was on pace for 4,300 yards and 35 touchdowns, so still a drop in both categories. How about Peyton Manning? 2004, he goes from over 4,500 yards and 49 touchdowns to over 3,700 yards and 28 touchdowns. In 2013, he had 5,477 yards and 55 touchdowns. Then in 2014, he had 4,700 yards and 39 touchdowns. So he almost did it again, but not quite. Still a drop in both categories, much closer than the massive drop-off from 2004 to 2005, but a drop-off nonetheless. Tom Brady in 2007, 4,800 yards and 50 touchdowns. The next year, he gets his ACL blown out in the first half of the first game, so we really don't know what he could have done. But then in 2020, he has 4,600 yards, 40 touchdowns, followed by a career high 5,300 yards and 43 touchdowns in 2021. But then in 2022, he has just under 4,700 yards and only 25 touchdowns. Matthew Stafford in 2011, he has 5,000 yards, 41 touchdowns. The next year, the yardage was close at 4,967. So he was less than 100 yards in difference, but dropped to 20 touchdowns, less than half. Then, he had in 2021, 4,886 yards, 41 touchdowns. The next year, he has just over 2,000 yards and only 10 touchdowns while playing in just 9 games. Those two 40-touchdown seasons were the outlier for Stafford. Other than 2011 and 2021, he only had over 30 touchdown passes one other time. Rodgers in 2011, 4,600 yards, 45 touchdowns. The next year, just under 4,300 yards and 39 touchdowns. So he almost did it 2 years in a row, just barely missed. A drop-off, but not anywhere close to as significant as what we've seen with these other guys. Drew Brees in 2011, 5,476 yards and 46 touchdowns. Then in 2012, 5,177 yards and 43 touchdowns. So still a drop, but hit those thresholds. And then in 2013, he had 5,162 yards and 39 touchdowns. Almost a three-peat there, but still he dropped each year. Just again, nowhere close to as significant as the other guys. Really, Brees stayed above 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns for the next 3 seasons after that. Say what you will, but Drew Brees was the model of consistency up until about 2018 when his body started to fall apart. Speaking of bodies falling apart, that brings us to Andrew Luck in 2014, 4,761 yards, 40 touchdowns. The next year, he played just 7 games and threw for 1,881 yards and 15 touchdowns. He nearly did it again in 2018, which was his last season in the NFL, finished with 4,593 yards and 39 touchdowns. Mahomes in 2018, 5,097 yards, 50 touchdowns. 2019, 4,031 yards, 26 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards less and about half the touchdowns. In 2022, he had 5,250 yards and 41 touchdowns. 2023, 4,183 yards and 27 touchdowns. Again, over 1,000 yards less and about half the touchdowns. Then with Burrow having done it last year, along with Baker, we don't know how that turns out, but that's why we're talking about it. This may not go as well as we think it's going to go. Now, that's not to say it's going to go terribly, but these quarterbacks outside of Brees and really Aaron Rodgers had significant drops in production the next season. Rodgers may not have hit the 4,540 again, but he was consistently 4,035 plus for a long stretch of his career after that 2011 season. And as I mentioned, Brees, 4,500 and easily 30 plus touchdowns for a long stretch of his career. Those other quarterbacks, hundreds of yards less in the passing game, big drops in touchdown production. Now, I didn't comb through to figure out why that might have happened. I don't remember every game or every injury all the way back to 2004. So there may have been extenuating circumstances that created those dips. Obviously, in Brady's case, he missed the whole next season, and then he does it in back-to-back years with the Bucs, followed by that 2022 season that was clouded, in his personal life falling apart, Byron Leftwich being a terrible coordinator, and the sudden departure of Bruce Arians, just to name a few reasons. What all of this boils down to is that Baker, despite having Edmonds and Godwin when he returns, and Egbuka and J-Mac, that doesn't mean that he's a lock to be in the top 5 in yards and touchdowns again this season. There's enough history here to show that quarterbacks that reach this plateau typically have lower numbers the following season. Now, Baker is somewhat an outlier here. He joins Manning, Brady, and Stafford as the only ones to do it for, to do it after playing for multiple teams. But Baker also took the longest to accomplish this out of the 10 guys. Mayfield hit these numbers in his 7th season in the league. The only one to take longer was Brees, who did it in his 10th year, but was well within the first 7 years of his Saints career, which is when really things took off for him. Granted, none of these other quarterbacks were on their 4th offensive coordinator in 3 years when they did it. Mayfield is now in his 3rd or on his third since arriving in Tampa. And while I don't think that's going to hurt the offense, there's certainly the chance that there are some slow starts and growing pains for the team while Grizz finds his comfort zone. I don't think anyone is going to be overly upset if Baker goes out and has 4,000 yards and 32 touchdowns. He's never had more than 30 before last season. So if he cuts down on the interceptions, say he cuts them in half from last year, but throws 10 less touchdowns, I don't think too many people are yelling that he's a bum or that he's regressing or that they're mad that he's going to be back next season. I truly don't. In fact, I would argue that he's throwing fewer touchdowns because maybe he doesn't have to throw that many touchdowns in order to keep the Bucs in games. The defense is playing better. Bucky is doing his thing, and Baker doesn't have to play hero ball nearly as often. I just got to thinking about it yesterday while I was at my son's return to hockey weekend, and I really started wondering how quarterbacks who threw for 4,500 yards and 40 touchdowns performed the following year, and if maybe we should temper expectations for Baker Mayfield just a little bit this season. I can tell you this, though, Baker is not tempering the expectations that he has for this team. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything: cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With so much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You get real, personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something you saw on social media. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, serving more than 5 million people. It's easy to fit into your schedule. Just a click to connect, and you can even switch therapists anytime if you need to. There is a lot to be said about somebody who is neutral in your life, looking at things with a fresh perspective and personalizing your care for you. So talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/locked-on. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked-on. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. NFL fantasy draft season is here, so for your second listen, go find the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast with hosts Vinny Iyer and Michelle Madjuk. Listen every day to prep for your fantasy draft and become the most informed manager so you can take home your league's trophy this season. Find Locked On Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So my friends over at RG Media dropped an article about Baker Mayfield, courtesy of DJ Siddiqui, who had the chance to chat with Mayfield, and one of the topics was the Bucs not being able to reach that next level in the postseason. Mayfield said, quote, "I think the last 2 years we've had midseason lulls, lost quite a few games in the middle of the year. Both years we've told each other just do the little things right, and it always comes down to that. We have a great roster, so how good can we do our job and not try and overthink it? Really do the bread and butter things extremely at a high level and then go from there. It's about the little details, and that's when you see teams that are good go to the great part. Winning the Super Bowl is always the goal, but for us, it's trying to close out the division early and really have the instinct to finish out games when we need to and play at a high level every single week." End quote. We talked about it all offseason long. Evan said it going back to last year. This is a team that's built to make their Super Bowl run now. This year, next year, the door is wide open. So they have to be able to take advantage of it. Now, that goes back to what Baker talked about with the little things, but it's also about controlling what you can control. Jason Light and Todd Bowles control the roster. So what do? They got Hassan Reddick. They drafted a stud receiver who we're going to talk about in a minute. Then they loaded up on depth in the secondary, which it appears they desperately need already. They went out and got another corner in free agency that balled out on Saturday against the Steelers. They signed a punter that looks like he can actually get the job done compared to what was happening last season. They locked up their left guard. They brought back a leader and an all-time great on the defense. They locked up their number 2 stud receiver, who's going to help tremendously when he returns to the field. What they cannot control is luck. That's why it's called luck. They can't control who gets hurt. And we're already seeing the secondary depth get tested, and we aren't even out of the preseason yet. They can't control what other teams do in the league or within the division. They can't control what the officials do on a week-to-week basis. They can only go out there and do their jobs. And if this team does their job the way every single one of them is capable of doing it, then they are going to be one of the toughest teams in the entire NFL to get past. I love what we're seeing from the defense already. They have been winning the day against the offense in practices since the start of camp. Now they're winning the day in these preseason games with a league-leading 6 preseason interceptions, and they've all come from different players. You've had interceptions by safeties, cornerbacks, linebackers. Everybody is out there trying to take the ball away from the other team, and that isn't something that we got from them last year, but it has been the point of emphasis for Todd Bowles this year, going into the draft, going into OTAs, rookie mini camps, mandatory mini camp, training camp. He has constantly said over and over, I need ball hawks. I want ball hawks. We can't just break passes up. We have to take them away. Something else that we didn't get from the Bucs last year was the play of wide receiver Emeka Egbuka, because he was too busy winning a national championship with that gross team in Columbus. But now he's the right kind of Buck, and people cannot get enough of him, especially Baker Mayfield. During this interview, like every other interview that Baker has given this offseason, he was more than happy to talk about the rookie receiver. Quote, we're ready to roll, hit the ground running in week 1. I'm excited about it. Emeka coming in and being a guy, even though he's a rookie, doesn't act like one, doesn't handle himself like one. He's a true professional. He's so intelligent. Between Chris Godwin and Mike Evans, they both have seen a lot of football, a lot of coverages. They understand how to win on leverage and whatnot. He reminds me of those guys mentally. When it comes to physical characteristics, he's quick, twitchy, explosive, end quote. When Baker was asked to compare Egbuka to an NFL player, Mayfield said Lions receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown, which is the same comparison that Rondé Barber used on the broadcast Saturday night. Quote, receivers don't always stay on the ground, run through the catch to get yards after the catch. And he reminds me of Amon-Ra St. Brown in a way, which is obviously high praise. Amon-Ra St. Brown is an absolute stud, but he does a lot of things similar to where he's always trying to make a big play. When you bring in guys like that are not only great football players, but great teammates and locker room guys, it just elevates the standard overall, the whole team, not just the offense. Anybody else that's coming in here can watch and look at him, and he just does everything the right way. I'm excited about the new face that we have, and definitely the same ones that we've had before, end quote. Egbuka's role in this offense is going to be massive right from the start of the season. Again, I mentioned it on my fantasy preview that he's the guy I am making sure I am leaving all my fantasy drafts with, because of, number one, the draft cost, but also because of his opportunity. It should not surprise anyone if he is leading the team in receptions, first downs, maybe even touchdowns over the course of the first 3 to 4 games. Baker absolutely loves this kid, and he is going to be locked in on him. Defenses may not make Egbuka prove himself too much before they focus on him, but the majority of their attention is still going to be on Mike Evans in the early part of the season, since Chris Godwin will be out. Again, not officially reported, but in my opinion, I am moving forward under the assumption that Chris Godwin will not suit up and play the beginning of the year. Now, you just have to hope that Jalen McMillan is fine and can start the season. There's been no update as of right now during this recording as to what his test results are. But according to Egbuka, he was joking around after the game and was in really good spirits. And then McMillan took to Instagram to tell all the fans not to worry and that he's completely fine. And, you know, he's good to go. So Todd Bowles is optimistic about some of the guys on the defensive side of the ball. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of the year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. This year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. I am less than 2 weeks away from my draft, and we are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's only one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. But if you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, Todd Bowles spoke to the media Sunday morning following the Buccaneers' preseason win over the Pittsburgh Steelers, and there were a few defensive players that he was asked about and that he seems really happy with to this point. Of course, he also put pressure on one group of players heading into this week, but I want to start with the injury side of things and rookie corner Benjamin Morrison. Now, Bowles was asked if Morrison's injury has caused him to be set back because he's missing time. And Bowles said, quote, "I don't think it's a huge setback. He watches film all the time, comes in early, and puts the tape on. He wants to learn. It's just about physically going through the reps. Mentally, he goes through them. He's not a guy to just sit in the training room and be hurt. He's trying to get better at all the little things. So when he comes back, he's ready to go. We think he'll be ready, and we won't have any problem putting him in when we need to put him in," end quote. Now, I do think it's a setback from the standpoint of there's no way that Morrison can start over one of the incumbent starters barring an injury in week one. Maybe he can play if he's ready to go, but he's not going to take Jamel Dean's spot. And after the drive that Dean had on Saturday, despite Bowles saying that they're happy with Dean's overall play since camp started, that was a door that would have opened for Morrison to go out there and really shake things up and really compete for this job. I mean, you can go back to my live immediate reaction. It was nonstop blunders for Jamel Dean that essentially gave the Steelers all the yards and their touchdown on that drive. Those are the kinds of opportunities that Morrison was going to be able to take advantage of, and now he can't because he's sidelined. Now, I am encouraged that they feel that he was already far enough along that they are comfortable putting him on the field if they want to. I just think that the most important thing is that he doesn't rush back and starts playing before that hamstring is really ready. We saw McMillan try to do that last season. It caused him to be in and out of the lineup for a stretch, and even when he was in there during that stretch, he wasn't overly effective. It wasn't until that hamstring fully healed towards the end of the year that he really went on that tear. With a corner, that is really, really asking for trouble, putting him out there before that hamstring is fully ready to go. Either way, it's an encouraging update nonetheless. The next guy I wanted to shout out on here was Chris Braswell. For those of you that were with me in the live show or that caught it afterwards, you know that I was really pleased with Braswell's performance, especially after how hard I came down on him following the Titans game. Well, I wasn't the only one. Todd Bowles was asked about the overall performance from the edge rushers, the position as a whole, and said, quote, "I was happy with the play of Braswell from the outside last night. The quarterback, Skylar Thompson, is a very good athlete. Sometimes we got out-athleted," which is not a word. That's something that Todd Bowles just made up. But you know what? I'm here for it. Out-athleted. That's going into my regular vernacular now. Anyway, sometimes we got out-athleted, and other times we could have done a better job with contain. Ramirez, Watts, Peoples, Jr. have to grow mentally and put it together. When they do it mentally, they don't do it physically. And when they do it physically, they don't do it mentally. So they have to put the whole package together. I'll be eager to see what they do next week. End quote. I don't disagree with that at all. And that's why I said last week that Braswell didn't have a ton to lose in this game because there wasn't anyone that was really going to challenge him for this job. I had one of the insiders write in and say, who has the most to gain or lose in this preseason game? And he had said, you're not allowed to choose Braswell. Well, Braswell wouldn't have been one of my choices because he doesn't have a lot to lose. Watts, Ramirez, Peoples, they are who they are at this point, and none of them, in my opinion, are good enough to overtake Braswell as the fourth edge rusher in the rotation. David Walker might have. With him out, Braz is locked in. That doesn't mean that he should get complacent or think that he doesn't have to keep improving and working harder, but it was encouraging that he got some recognition from the coach when he was asked about the position group as a whole. But now, we have to get to the players that Bowles indirectly called out. I talked about it a lot leading up to the game, even called out one of these players as the biggest faller on the defense when I talked about the risers and fallers because of such a massively blown opportunity. But Bowles was asked about the safeties, especially now with J.J. Roberts hitting season-ending injured reserve. And he said, quote, "They played a lot. I'm not finished going through the tape yet, but Merriweather probably has the most experience since he was here last year and played the last half of the season. He knows both positions. Wisdom was on the practice squad last year and actually played nickel in the second half because we were down corners. He did a heck of a job playing nickel, strong safety, and free safety from a knowledge standpoint. Shiloh is very aggressive, very young, and very hungry. He can make plays in the box and run down to give us 100% on special teams. This last week is going to be very important for those guys to show up." End quote. First, not a super glowing review of any of these guys, but the last sentence is the one that I want to focus on. This week is going to be very important for those guys to show up. So this race, this battle is wide open. Now, I think Merriweather is the obvious front runner, but he's not a lock by any stretch of the imagination. It's going to take a bad week from him and a stellar week from Wisdom for Wisdom to make that jump, and take over as the leader of these bubble safeties. It would take a horrendous week from Merriweather, a bad week from Wisdom, and a perfect week from Shiloh to skyrocket him to the top of this competition. Special teams is important, so I don't want to overlook Bowles' comments about Shiloh's play on special teams, but you still have to trust that they're going to show up on the defensive side of the ball too. I talked about it a few times with Shiloh, that the biggest disadvantage that he has is how difficult this position is to learn in Bowles' defense. Well, now the other problem staring him in the face is the experience and the versatility of the two guys ahead of him. Merriweather has the experience, knows the position the best, can play both of the safety positions. But then on the flip side, Rashad Wisdom is just like Christian Izien. He can play both safety spots plus nickel corner, which makes him an insanely valuable asset for the Bucs depth. That gives you three guys that can play multiple positions in the secondary between Wisdom, Izien, and Tyke Smith. And keeping Wisdom makes your depth that much stronger. So that's going to be the big battle of the week. Of course, you still have wide receiver, you have backup center, you have a couple of these other battles, potentially the battle between Josh Williams and Owen Wright. If the Bucs are going to keep 4 running backs, you might have a battle at tight end if the Bucs are only going to keep 3 of those instead of 4. But I don't think that there's a position battle this hotly contested by this many guys that can still go to any of them. Obviously, there's more receivers in the battle for the final wide receiver spot, but really, as I mentioned, on the last couple episodes, it's a 2-man race. I think Rakim Jarrett has played his way out of contention. All of this starts on Tuesday when they return to the practice field, and we will be back on Tuesday with Evan Klosky. So please make sure that you're checking out everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. And if you're on Twitter, I am currently in a battle with Saints host Ross Jackson. Now, you all know I love Ross, but my Mount Rushmore is up against his Mount Rushmore. And because Ross has 20,000 followers, close to 21,000 on Twitter, I'm at a severe disadvantage here. So the Bucs Mount Rushmore, as you know, Derek Brooks, Rondé Barber, Leroy Selman, Mike Evans. The Saints, Drew Brees, Ricky Jackson, Willie Roaf, and Cam Jordan. Guys, you can't let the Saints win this. Now, I've been working my way back on this. We're battling back, but you guys got to go to Twitter and vote. I've retweeted it on the Locked On Bucs account. I have retweeted it on my own account. So go over to Twitter, vote on that. Let's not lose to the Saints and Ross Jackson in this Mount Rushmore poll. Make sure that you are following on Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs at both of those places. Subscribe on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to be an insider, it's real easy. Like this episode and then leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.